Welcome to Keeping Up with Trends. This is Fed Ray's senior trading strategist here at CMTrading, and we are joined with our host Sergio Davids. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening.
Hey Fred, always a pleasure to be here, man. And it's a good morning in South Africa.
Is it?
Some great weather for a change, so I'm enjoying it. I'm honestly thinking about the beach. It's the middle
Oh
of
wow,
winter for us, but I'm thinking about the beach.
wow! I'm thinking about
So
the beach all the time. When winter, summer.
a year, it's quite a heat wave. I mean, I'm hearing about Greek islands that had to be evacuated.
Yes, but
It's gone crazy in Europe.
yeah, it's just the entire globe actually
Yeah.
has been out of control. And I'll add that I was in Phoenix, Arizona back in February,
Oh
and
yeah.
supposedly they had probably um, one of the worst summers. It was like over 110 degrees for over 19 days straight.
That's insane.
So
That's insane.
I'm not so convinced that there isn't global warming. You know, people say, "Oh, there's no global warming." I don't know about
Yeah, I don't know how you can deny it with literal, you know, Texas on fire.
that. Yeah, I don't see that. You know, like
Well, speaking of, inflammatory, things, I thought we could kick off with what's happened to the US dollar in terms of the Fitch downgrade. So, ratings agency Fitch downgraded, the United States currency rating from, triple A to double A plus. So what does that mean, going forward?
what does that mean? Um, you know, there's so many ways that you could skin a cat. Okay,
Sure.
and one of the things I learned really early in business is that when everybody's making money, everybody's friends,
Right.
and when things start getting difficult, everybody's looking to point a finger on somebody else, and no one's willing to step up and say, "No, this was on my watch, and this was on my calling, and I'm taking responsibility for it." Ironically, I do remember Bush Jr. saying, that the credit crunch crisis happened on his watch
Right.
towards the end of his term, and he kind of alluded to it. And I wouldn't say took responsibility for it, but did allude to it. So, it's very easy to take responsibility when things are going great, but I think it takes a real man to take responsibility, or a real woman for that fact, to take responsibility when things are not doing well, and to say, "Listen, we made a
Yeah.
mistake." And so, this has been the undoing of the American, and there's so many aspects of this. There's
Right.
political aspects, there's economic aspects of it, there's monetary policies. You know, a government is not just Donald Trump, okay? A country is not just one aspect of it, okay? Um, and it's not just Joe Biden. It's several aspects. There are businesses involved. There are regulatory standards that are implemented and then affect the economy.
Yeah.
There's monetary policy that affects the economy. So there's a lot of aspects to
Well,
this.
what's interesting, you mentioned Bush Jr., right? Let me just read you a statement from the rating agency. So it says, in Fitch's view, there's been a steady deterioration in the standards of governance over the last 20 years, including fiscal and debt matters, notwithstanding the June bipartisan agreement to suspend the debt limit until 2025. So, like you were saying, it's a combination of political and, regulatory, changes.
So let's unpack that. If you think, what has happened in the past 20 years in the United States? Well, we did have the credit crunch crisis. That was
Right.
one. That happened in the last 20 years. But we also had the most massive expansion that we've ever seen in the history of the United States happen only in the past, I would say, 8 years,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I mean,
That's fair.
markets recovered during the Obama administration, specifically in the second half of his administration.
Yeah.
But prior to that, and leaving from the Republicans of, Bush Jr. into his first term, markets, it was business as usual. It was an expansion, but I would call it business as usual.
Yep.
And it was slow expansion. Let's just call it. But that got accelerated once Trump came into the White House. And so there's a few factors here, that there, and in every boom there's a bust. And
Sure.
also over this time period, we had a pandemic that America started printing more money than it's ever printed before, which was over the top already.
Yeah. Which has led us into this mass inflationary environment that we're in now.
So then it's
So,
all these factors, and unfortunately, when someone said this to me in early business days when I was a teenager, and I couldn't fully appreciate it. His father was a very successful man, and this guy was like Arthur. You remember Arthur, the movie?
oh yeah,
He's like he
I
was.
love this drink.
Yeah, I love this drink. So this guy was like that, right? So he
Yeah,
said, but every so often, this guy would come up with like really like very well thought out kind of insightful kind of statements. And he said, one time he mentioned like this on the side. I remember when he said it. We were walking the sidewalk. I don't know how I knew this guy. I guess by association and community. And he said, they always say when the head of the fish stink, the entire fish stinks. It was a
that's
thing his father used to say.
it's. I remember that saying. It's a Vietnamese saying. The fish rots from the head down.
So I mean, like when our regulators, when our leaders are failing us,
Right.
in as much, and this is what happens is that you know they remember the movie Wall Street, and
Yes. Yes.
uh, Michael Douglas gets up there and he says, "Greed is good. Greed works. Greed is what makes the whole world turn."
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It makes this whole, but greed also destroys people and destroys governments as well. Now,
Sure.
up until I don't know, greed has always been, and they've been always infighting between the Republicans and the Democrats,
Sure.
but not to the point to destroy the ship,
That's
meaning
the
the
thing.
very
You know,
vessel that you're standing in.
I think especially their political spectrum has now become extreme on both sides.
And it's a
And like
pendulum.
you said, nobody's thinking about for the better of, well, the ship, and the ship being, the American citizens. Speaking of, extreme views, right? I've got a statement here from U.S. Press Secretary, okay, on the Fitch ratings. She says, "We strongly disagree with this decision. The ratings model used by Fitch declined under President Trump and then improved under President Biden, and it defies reality to downgrade the United States at a moment when President Biden has delivered the strongest recovery of any major economy in the world." Um, Thoughts on that? I can continue.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. And it's clear that extremism by Republican officials, from cheerleading default to undermining governance and democracy to seeking to extend deficit busting tax giveaways for the wealthy and corporations, is a continued threat to our economy. So, clearly coming from a Democrat base, sure. But what do you think of some of the points she's making?
I think she's trying to promote her boss
Her
to be
boss, yeah.
reelected. Comes 2024. I think that's
Sure.
what that's completely. So many things about what she said is so false. I mean, on paper it sounds so nice and
Yeah.
so like flowery and but that's not true. You know, I don't particularly like the person on a personal level, but I'll tell you, Donald Trump coming into the United States as a president shook and rattled the markets in ways that like and had he had his second term he would have been able to steer the ship completely from a fiscal
Point of view.
responsibility into a
Well,
much better place.
he might get his chance at a second term in a year's time.
But
What do you
I don't
think his chances are?
I don't know, Sergio. I'll tell you this much. I don't think his if he's going up against Biden again, he's going to lose for sure.
I think he's he definitely needs to win to somehow stay out of jail. There's so many indictments. Just the other day he was indicted, I
Yeah, but
believe, for the January he's part in the
indictments, which
January
are,
6th.
I mean, these indictments, and if you want to call it counter indictments on the Bidens, are
Oh yeah,
all part of this, ridiculous circus match that they're all
yeah,
playing. I would rather go to someone who's, I would say, a Democrat himself. J.P. Morgan has a CEO, Jamie Dimon, who's probably one of the most iconic financial figures of the American landscape today.
right.
And yeah, there's George Soros. Yeah, there's Ray Dalio. There's lots of them. Okay. But as a CEO to the largest bank and financial institution in the world, okay, um, who took it out of tremendous stress and is I would call him an alpha male, super duper kind of guy that you can relate to on a street level. Okay. And he called this downgrade ridiculous. Now, Jamie Dimon, if you Google it, he has this about 3 minute response to what he thinks about the American country and the American economy. And I can't do justice to it, so Google it. But
Sure.
he says somewhere along the lines, you don't understand the advantage of living in the United States. You have no enemies on your backyard. You have one huge piece of water, another huge piece of water on the other side, so completely deterring any kind of, you know, massive kind of superpower invading your country. You have a weak country to your north, weaker countries to your south. So in terms of preserving your border, you could potentially be very strong. Now you have ridiculous amount of natural resources. You have the best educational institutions, higher educational institutions in the world, the most progressive capitalist system in the world that doesn't inhibit. And he goes on for about 10 minutes about it. And he's
Sure.
right. And he's right. Like I look at some of the opportunities that you get, Eastern Europe, parts of Europe, parts of Africa. The world is a really restrictive place. So
Sure. And I think a lot of that's got to do with politics.
for
You know,
sure, there's policy,
it.
there's regulatory standards of how much you're going to control and how much you're going to let go of that control.
So if I can bring this back to trading, right? What does this mean for the US dollar going forward? I mean, I don't see any change in terms of the market. In fact,
Well,
the euro's at its, well, not its lowest, but it's gone down.
yeah, I mean, the
So
dollar did get mildly stronger over the past couple of days.
yeah,
Nothing to really write home about. But all intents and purposes, if America goes down, the rest of the world goes down.
sure. I mean, everything's tied to the US
Our
dollar
entire system, our
and the
entire
world's
economic
biggest
system.
economy.
Right. Our entire, but not just the world's biggest economy, the economy that sets the standard for everything else. So, and can it happen? Absolutely. If there's more infighting like this between the Democrats and the Republicans, it's like as if they want to shoot themselves in the foot.
Yeah. It's a shame though because, only the American citizens will be the one to suffer,
No, the
from
whole
this kind
world will
of.
be suffering.
Oh yeah. Well, as a, byproduct of their, partisanship. So I think we've got time for something else that's big in the markets. We've got Apple and Amazon earnings both on the same day. And, as usual, I know you
And
don't like.
Alibaba.
Oh yeah. And I know you don't like, sitting the train until, the done with the earnings. But, for any new listener out there, for anyone's, just joining, right? How does one trade earnings? What are some of the approaches you can take?
Okay, so I mean, usually when the news comes out, it's almost impossible to trade it because You need a very special kind of system to be able to trade it called level three, which is accessible to mostly financial institutions only. It's not available, mostly not available on the retail level. Does it
Right.
exist on the retail level? It does. Okay, I'm not going to lie to you. However, you have to really, you have to take tests and be regulated yourself in order to trade on a level three level. Now, what does level three mean?
Right.
Level three means that you see the entire book of trades and who the players are at the given moment in the market. Now, when you're trading on the MT4 trading platform, or even when you're trading with, well-established brokers in the market like Charles Schwab or Interactive Brokers, they're only giving you the inside market. What does that mean? The inside market. They're giving you the the bid and the ask of what is happening in the market at this moment. Okay,
Right.
but you don't see the entire book underneath it of who's bidding it and how much they're bidding it for. So, if, for example, you have, for just an example, okay, you have the highest price someone is willing to buy it is $1. That's your bid price, and the ask price is, let's say, $1.50. Okay, and that's the highest price someone is willing to sell it for. Now, underneath them, okay, there's a bunch of other standing trades. There's 151. There's 101. No, 199 cents, right? And as you go down in the book, you see who the buyers and sellers are, right? And market makers or financial institutions are the ones that take on both sides. They are the ones that are responsible to offer liquidity to the financial markets. Now, they have their rules and regulations that they have to abide by, and they are watched by the FINRA, by SEC, by lots of um, regulatory bodies to make sure that they're executing their trades either on behalf of themselves or their clients
Right.
in a responsible way. Okay, so how did we digress into this? You asked me, how do you trade this markets?
Yeah.
And so when you have access to that, you have access to a lot more information. And because most of the earning news comes on off hour market
Yeah.
hours and not on open market hours, and they do that intentionally to kind of stabilize
I've
the
always
market.
wondered about that.
Yeah,
Not
they
many
do.
companies do it, early in the morning so you can trade on them. Why is that?
So they do. They do before 9 o'clock
All right.
or after 4 p.m. Eastern time. And that's because the US markets, that's when the US markets open and that's when they trade. So most of the world has access to trading these stocks during that open time. And unless you have the level three, you can't trade it in after hours trading. And you can't really see the levels. So it's a hard, to trade the news and to trade earnings is very hard. However, with that said, the reaction to it in the market the next day when the news hits the market, that's a separate story. And that becomes a lot more interesting
Yeah.
because, like, for example, let's look at some of the information that came out already. Facebook, okay? Facebook had earnings just last week, was it?
Mm-hmm.
And it had a gap up because it was good news, and then it sold off, but it didn't sell off completely, and then it kind of faded off and tested its highs again and rebounded. Now this is classic trading where you have a gap up and then a
Yeah.
fill in the gap, okay, or you have a gap down and then fill in the gap the other way, or a gap and go. Like the reactionary trades, there are much more technical applications to it. Okay, so
Okay.
those are the type of potential that you're looking for the next day and to see the reaction. Now, I wouldn't
Yeah.
suggest, going off the cuff, but I would suggest until like usually the reactional move has a re-reactional move.
Yeah. Sure. Whoever's buying and whoever's selling off. So yeah.
So,
What are your thoughts on Apple and Amazon? I mean, two
well,
very different companies.
very different companies. I mean, consumer. I think consumer spending is still up there. I don't think it,
You
you
think
know,
so? Look,
yeah.
Amazon's been in, a bit of trouble, especially last year. I mean, they were the clear winners, of during the COVID, era, what with everyone switching to online shopping. But you could see that downtrend just at the end of 2022. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see if they're in a comeback. Apple, on the other hand, has always just been amazing in terms of their performance.
Apple has quarter to quarter, I think since 2000 and I want to say 2004, 2005 has not
Yeah.
seen a missed quarter.
Well, it's also interesting because they've kept their core product, on the top of the market, being phones and the Macs, and it's interesting to see how they've sort of diversified their offering. I mean, they're into making movies and series now with Apple TV. You've got Apple services now. You can bank with Apple.
Yeah, they're very
Methodical.
methodical with how they do it. And somehow I think they all kind of synergize it back into their core. Um, yeah, I mean, like, you know, why not? I mean, like, if it's an extensional product, and especially once you have a good name and like Apple, you have a good reputation in the market. Run with it.
Yeah, sure. And on one final note, any advice for traders out there?
Buy low, sell high.
Outstanding, man. As always.
Okay, Sergio,
Awesome. I'll see you on the next one.
you got it.